Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Really United States video blog. I'm your host Paul Campbell, and as always behind the camera is my wife and camera operator Beverly Campbell. And we're here at the Highland View Cemetery. Now, some of my friends and colleagues, other video bloggers around the world, have been nice enough to share with us what cemeteries look like in their part of the world. Some of my Russian friends have been very thorough in showing us how cemeteries in Russia, for example, look. And they do look somewhat different than cemeteries here in the United States. So we wanted to take this opportunity to share with you the cemetery that's closest to where we live. It's a very lovely cemetery. And we wanted to show you some of the highlights. Now, this is a huge cemetery. There are, in fact, by last account, 9,011 interments here. But it's still an open cemetery. There are still people being interred here, and it will continue to be a thriving cemetery for some time. Now, one of the things that I'd like to do at this point is I'd like to walk over here and show you the grave of one of our Civil War heroes who actually is interred here in Big Rapids, Michigan at the Highland View Cemetery. One of the more famous people interred here at the Highland View Cemetery is Brevet Brigadier General Stephen Bronson. Now, I'll try to leave an explanation down in the comments below explaining what brevet means. It's a certain type of commission that one gets during the course of their career, specifically for battle engagements, depending on what group they're assigned to, but it doesn't actually affect their rank in the standing in the regular military. But we'll get to that in the comments below. But General Bronson was in fact quite the hero of the Union Army in the Civil War and served at many very famous battles. They don't all spring to mind, but certainly the one that you may be familiar with, one of the most bloody battles in American history, the Battle of Gettysburg. And General Bronson did in fact survive that engagement. After his retirement, he was in the service for about 4.5 years. He moved to Big Rapids, where he went into civilian life and carried out a number of different industries, made a living here, made a life here, and was buried here in Big Rapids, right in the very front of the cemetery. He's one of the original interments here at the cemetery. So I'd say we're quite proud to have a Civil War Brigadier General hero here laid to rest in our town. And as you'll see, as I will mention elsewhere in the video, that as a veteran, as a war hero, the grave is of course marked with our national flag and a bronze marker indicating his service in the Civil War. So this is actually quite a nice treat for me to be able to share with you. This is a gorgeous setting. He's front and center. We actually looked for quite a while before we found General Bronson's cemetery grave, but he's right here in the front. You drive past him, anyone that comes in. So one of the things that you will see in many American cemeteries, and probably cemeteries in many parts of the world, is this sort of a structure called a mausoleum. Now, a mausoleum is an above-ground burial site, which is used often for entire families. Typically families of stature or wealth who can afford this. This is a much more expensive means of burial, and this would be something that was built where you would be interred, and perhaps your spouse, maybe your children or grandchildren, an entire family might be interred here inside of this structure when you passed. Now, this particular mausoleum is significant in this particular cemetery because it's a rather famous person who is interred here, Woodbridge Ferris. Now, Mr. Ferris was the founder of Ferris Industrial College, which later became Ferris State University. Now, Ferris State University is a large university here in the United States. It's part of the Michigan State University system, and it is probably the largest employer in the city of Big Rapids. It's a significant college. People come from all over the state, all over the country, some from all over the world to attend school here. I would like to point out one interesting thing here. Above Mr. Ferris's name, it says 1911. Well, 1911 was actually when the mausoleum was built, not when Mr. Ferris died. Mr. Ferris died in 1928. But he had this constructed, so he had a place to be interred with his family. I'm not sure, I don't know enough of the history of the Ferrises to know who else is interred here with Mr. Ferris, if his spouse and his family are interred here. But that's typically the reason one builds a mausoleum and is interred above the earth. But this is a fairly common sort of mausoleum here in the United States. They're relatively small. They're made out of granite usually. Occasionally you will see one made out of marble, but they're definitely built to last for thousands of years, whence the use of granite. Interesting point about granite is that it's not unusual. There's an idiomatic expression in the United States as a cemetery being a marble orchard. Well, marble is a sedimentary rock. Granite is an igneous rock. It's a much harder substance, much more durable, and most of the monuments you will see in American cemeteries are made from granite. It's not exclusively true, but most of them are and have been for a very long time. Now you notice this has been very well maintained by the cemetery caretakers. The planters here are well painted. The flowers are in bloom, even though we are here in the autumn. It's mid-October, and the leaves are changing for the most part in many of the trees, although some of them are still green. But we are here in the early autumn, and yet the flowers have still been well maintained and are in bloom. And so this is the resting place of one of Big Rapids' most famous individuals. Now we're going to move over, and I'd like to show you another example of a family plot where families are often interred together. Now here's another example of a typical American way of interring an entire family, where you have a single large marker with the family's name, their given name, and then the individual graves, which I'm trying to stand at a respectful distance from so as not to walk on the graves, are then in front of the family plot marker. Now this isn't quite as common now in the 21st century, but it was more common in the early part of the 20th century and in the 19th century to have family plots with a large family name marker and then the individual graves marked with their own headstones. Now I realize it's very difficult, probably impossible from the video to actually read these, and again I don't want to walk on the graves, but Mr. and Mrs. Garland are the centermost graves. Mr. Garland here and Mrs. Garland here. 1844 and 1845 respectively when they were born. Mr. Garland died in 1906, Mrs. Garland in 1911. Now, we obviously see, as we get further out, these are probably their children. children's spouses or their grandchildren. And again, this massive piece of granite that will last thousands of years as the marker for the family that will stay together now for eternity. One of the things that have been pointed out to me by some of the video blogger friends that I have around the world, especially those in the Eastern Hemisphere, my friends in Russia, is that often in graves there is a photograph or picture of some type of the deceased on the headstone. In the United States, this is extremely uncommon. You will very, very rarely, almost never see a picture of the deceased on this marker where they're interred. Typically here we have only their name, maybe their relationship to someone else, their date of birth, and their date of passing. It is very rare to see a picture. Now, on occasion you will see where a likeness of the person is etched into the granite as a permanent part of the granite marker, but again, that's still relatively rare. It seems to be quite common in other parts of the world. It's a nice practice. It's not one that we generally observe here in the United States. Cemeteries here in the United States are much more subdued. But as you can see, this is a very lovely setting. This particular cemetery is nice in the fact that it's very hilly and rolling. It's easy to see all the markers. It's not just a flat plain with rows and rows of markers. This is a typical American cemetery in certain respects, but it's a very nice example in the fact that it's such a rolling, beautiful, peaceful, well-treed environment. Very nice place. So now we're going to move on and show you some other things that we think are significant here in the cemetery. This particular part of the cemetery, to anyone who's from the United States, is easily recognizable as a military cemetery or a military plot within the cemetery. Many of my viewers around the world have mentioned how they're surprised how many people display the flag and how often the flag is displayed. Well, clearly on military graves, it's very common for us to display our national flag. Now, I would like to point out a couple of things. I had mentioned that many of the monuments were in fact made out of granite. Well, that there were exceptions, and here's an example. The majority of these markers are in fact carved from marble. And again, the majority of these markers are from the mid-19th century, and specifically from veterans of our Civil War. These markers right here that you see in bronze by many of them in the front, in fact, say 1861 to 1865. It was their date of service. Some of the others just say veteran, but these are all military graves from veterans that served in the United States Armed Forces. This is a fairly common way. If you've seen pictures, those of you around the world, of our national cemetery in Arlington, Virginia, you'll notice that there's very uniform white gravestones, tombstones, marked very much like these. Gettysburg, as I recall, has markers very similar to these. Too many of them. But it is nice that the caretakers of this cemetery have gone to the effort to maintain this in such an orderly fashion, to maintain these flags and keep them neat, and to show respect for those who have served our nation. We're in one of the oldest parts of the cemetery right now, towards the entrance. And I wanted to point out this small stone. There's no markings on this stone. There may have been at one time, They have since worn away. This was probably from the mid-19th century. You can tell from its small size and the fact that there is no name engraved on it that this was probably a child, and very probably a child that may have died at birth or shortly after birth, and was buried here at the foot of the family plot. It's sort of a sad thing, but it's nice to see that this child was remembered and marked and part of the family. And this is not an uncommon thing. Again, this is, I believe, a marble headstone that was used commonly in the mid-19th century. And another reason that marble isn't used any longer, that granite is used, because they're more durable. The names persevere for longer. But this would have not been a particularly uncommon thing to have a marker simply to mark the grave of a lost child in a period in our history when disease was not easily controlled, medical technology was crude, and the attrition rate of families of young children was quite high. Here's another example of a family plot. Now this family's name was Moon, but this is a fairly common thing that you will see in family plots, is some sort of an obelisk that maintains a figurine on top of an angel or a patron saint or something of that nature. Now in this particular case, the family monument is in the center and the graves are lined up so that they face each other, giving more the feeling of family unity. And again, I'd like to point out that while these are, again, granite markers, this particular member of the family, obviously a military veteran, and his grave has been marked to indicate that, and maintained by the people who maintain the cemetery here. Lovely stairway here that's maintained, that you see I'm up on the first platform. It continues on up, and there's yet other obelisks, other monuments that are family plots. And these large markers, again, are typical of what families will do to mark the family plot, and they will buy a whole series of plots together so that the family can remain together forever. Family, a very important part of our lives and something that we want to carry with us, well, for eternity. There's certainly nothing unique about cemeteries to the United States. And there's nothing particularly unique about this cemetery, I suppose, versus thousands and thousands of others across the United States. There is something about cemeteries in general that gives us a certain sense of ambivalence. We like to know that our loved ones are cared for and that they're near us, that we can visit them. And we like to believe that when our time comes that we'll be remembered as well, and that people will come and remember us and visit us. And at the same time, there's something about cemeteries that inherently causes us to think about our own mortality, which I suppose is a good thing in a way. It makes us stop and think about the importance of life and want us to reach out and grab life and really make the most of it that we can. So I'm hoping that this video will not only show you what a typical cemetery in the United States looks like, but will give you time to pause and think about the importance of life, the things you want to do, and to go out and to do them. To go out and grab life by the throat and really live it. One of the things that myself and my colleagues that do this type of vlog have tried to accomplish is to show you that we all have something in common around the world. We have many of the same dreams, hopes, desires, goals, aspirations, and we also share the same mortality. This is what awaits us all. So we make the most of it while you can, folks. I hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Real United States video blog. If you have questions or comments, please leave them in the comments section below. I'll try to get back to everybody just as soon as I possibly can. We appreciate you taking time to watch this episode of the Real United States video blog. We hope you'll like it. We hope you'll share it with your friends. If you haven't subscribed, of course, it would be nice if you would subscribe and join us for future episodes. And as always, thank you for watching.